What if the man everyone feared was the only one who ever treated her with kindness? That was the question that haunted 19-year-old Emma Hernandez on the day her life changed forever. The wind whistled through the streets of Chicago as Emma worked at the small boarding house, scrubbing floors until her knees ached. She earned just enough to buy bread and a thin coat to survive each winter. Orphaned at 12 after a factory fire took her parents, Emma had spent 7 long years fighting to stay alive. She had seen hunger, cruelty, and loneliness. Most nights, she cried quietly into her pillow, wishing for one day of peace. That wish arrived in the form of a letter. It came on a cold Tuesday morning in late September. Mrs. Patterson, the strict owner of the boarding house, handed it to Emma with raised brows. The old woman looked her up and down as if wondering who would bother writing to a girl with no family, no money, and no future. Emma's hands shook as she opened it. The letter was from a man named Richard Wright, a landowner from the Colorado Territory. He wrote in a firm, respectful manner. He said he was seeking a wife to help him manage his property in the mountains. He promised a home, safety, and a chance at a new life. Emma read it over and over, barely believing it. A stranger wanted to marry her, a man who offered comfort and stability. It seemed like the answer to a prayer she had never dared to speak. After days of sleepless thinking, she wrote back with honesty. She told him about her poor background, her lack of schooling, and her willingness to work hard. She did not mention her nightmares, or how loud voices made her freeze in fear. Those memories were locked deep in her heart. 1 month later, a second letter came. Richard sent money for her travel west. He asked her to meet him in the small town of Silver Creek. He said they would marry the same day she arrived. His words were brief, yet gentle enough to give her hope. Leaving Chicago was the hardest decision she ever made. Emma packed only one carpet bag with a dress, a shawl, and the small picture of her parents. She climbed into a wagon with strangers heading west. Many whispered cruel jokes about mail-order brides, as if a woman desperate for a better life deserved shame. During the journey, Emma kept to herself. But one night at the campfire, she heard Richard's name. The wagon master mentioned him, and the reaction was instant. "You're going to marry the mountain man?" one traveler asked with shock. "Girl, you don't know what you're walking into." Stories spread around the fire like sparks from burning wood. They said Richard Wright lived alone in the mountains, far from town. Some claimed he spoke to wild animals. Others said he fought off wolves with his bare hands. Many swore he had a dark temper, a wild nature, and a past soaked in violence. "He's 7 feet tall," a woman insisted, "with hands the size of bear paws and eyes that shine at night." Emma shivered under her blanket. She stared into the fire, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But she had no money to go back, no home waiting for her behind. She had chosen this path, and she prayed she would survive it. On a chilly gray morning, the stagecoach reached Silver Creek. The town was small, dusty, and filled with rough-looking men. Emma stepped down with shaking legs, her heart thudding in her chest. Then she heard a voice. "Miss Hernandez!" A man approached, and Emma nearly gasped. He did not look like a monster. He was tall, strong, and rugged, yes, but his deep brown eyes were warm and calm. A scar marked his left cheek, yet it did not make him frightening. He looked like a man who had lived through hardships and learned silence instead of cruelty. "I'm Richard Wright," he said kindly. "I hope your trip wasn't too hard." Emma nodded, unable to find her voice. He did not stare at her worn dress or her tired face. He looked at her as if she mattered. Richard arranged for a preacher to marry them that afternoon. The wedding was simple. Emma wore her best blue dress. Richard wore a clean white shirt and dark jacket. When he placed the ring on her finger, his hand was warm and gentle. After the small meal with the preacher's family, Emma noticed something strange. Sheriff Coleman, a broad man with cold eyes, walked up to them outside the general store. He stared at Emma too long, making her skin crawl. "Pretty little wife you got there, right?" he said with a smirk. "Did you tell her why folks don't visit your cabin, or what they say about you?" Richard stayed calm, but Emma saw his jaw tighten. The sheriff's words felt like a warning. Emma suddenly understood that Richard was not liked here, that his name carried shadows. Once supplies were packed, Richard lifted Emma into the wagon for the long ride to their home in the mountains. The air grew colder as they climbed higher. Tall pines surrounded them. By the time they reached the cabin at sunset, Emma felt the chill deep in her bones. The cabin was small but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and handmade furniture. It felt more like a home than anywhere she had lived before. Richard carried her bag inside. "It's not perfect," he said quietly, "but it's safe. I hope you will feel at home." That night, Emma expected him to act like most men. Instead, Richard surprised her. "You take the loft," he said, making a bed for himself near the fire. "I won't crowd you. Take the time you need." No man had ever given her comfort without a price. That single act planted something new inside her, a seed of trust. But Emma did not know the trouble was already growing far beyond the cabin walls. The same sheriff who watched her with dark interest would soon spread lies about her, lies that would put her life in danger, and the town would come for her with torches. Emma slowly began to adjust to mountain life. The days were quiet, filled with simple routines. Richard woke before sunrise to hunt or check his traps, while Emma cooked, cleaned, and learned new skills she had never needed in the city. The silence of the mountains first felt frightening, but soon it became peaceful. For the first time in her life, she slept without fear of footsteps outside her door. Richard was patient and gentle. He never raised his voice. He never forced his presence on her. He asked her opinion on things, listened to her thoughts, and respected her space. The more time she spent with him, the more her fear of him slowly faded. The stories she had heard on the journey seemed like lies now. Richard wasn't a monster. He was a quiet man who had seen too much pain in the world. Emma noticed the scar on his face and the sadness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. He was healing too, just like her. But beyond the mountain, trouble was growing faster than either of them realized. One evening in November, Richard returned from town with a heavy expression. He placed supplies on the table, his shoulders tense. "There's talk," Richard said. "Sheriff Coleman is telling people you're not my wife at all. He's saying I brought a witch into these mountains." Emma felt her heart drop. The word witch had followed her all her life. Her green eyes, her calm way with animals, her ability to sense storms before they came. People always whispered. "What kind of talk?" she asked, her voice shaking. Richard sat down across from her. "He's convincing folks that you bewitched me. He blames you for the early snow, the poor hunting, even for folks getting sick in town." Emma's hands trembled. She had only ever tried to help. She shared herbs to ease pain. She warned a traveler of an incoming storm. But people feared what they did not understand. "Do you believe him?" Emma whispered. Richard reached across the table and took her hand. "No, I believe in what I see. And what I see is a brave young woman who survived things most never could." His words warmed her more than the fire ever could. Still, fear settled in her heart. She knew how quickly rumors grew into hate. She had seen it in Chicago. She had seen crowds turn, friendships break, and violence ignite over a whisper. Soon after, people in town refused to trade with Richard. Doors closed when he walked past. Friends he once trusted now avoided him. Worse, small warnings began to appear near their cabin. Dead animals thrown near their well, strange markings carved into trees. Gunshots late at night meant to scare them. Richard wanted to leave. "We can pack what we need and go deeper into the mountains," he told her. "Somewhere they won't bother us." Emma shook her head. "I ran my whole life. I will not run again." That winter, a deadly blizzard hit the mountains. Snow fell thicker and faster than anyone had seen in years. One afternoon, Richard had gone to check his traps and did not return. Hours passed, the sky turned white, and Emma felt a sharp panic that he was in danger. She wrapped herself in the warmest clothes she had and stepped into the storm. Snow whipped against her face, the wind howling like a living thing. She couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, but something inside her guided her steps, a feeling, a pull, a voice she didn't hear with her ears but with her heart. She found Richard beneath a fallen tree, unconscious and bleeding, her breath caught in her throat. She had no strength to lift the tree, yet she did. She freed him and dragged him home through the storm. The journey felt endless, but her love for this man she barely knew gave her strength. Richard survived, but the town twisted the story when it reached them. People said no normal girl could walk through a storm like that. No girl could lift a tree that size. It had to be magic. Evil magic. Sheriff Coleman now had proof, or so he claimed. He held meetings in the church, spreading fear like poison. He told people Emma was dangerous and must be dealt with. Men rallied around him, driven by fear, anger, and the sheriff's influence. By spring, things reached a breaking point. One night, Emma woke with a tight feeling in her chest. Something was coming. She shook Richard awake. He listened, and his face hardened. "Stay behind me," he told her. "No matter what happens, stay behind me." Outside, torches appeared in the darkness. Angry voices echoed through the trees. Sheriff Coleman led a mob of armed men toward the cabin. "Emma Wright," his voice boomed. "Come out now, and we'll make this quick. Force us to come in, and it will go badly for you both." Richard stood at the window, rifle in hand. Emma could see at least a dozen men, some she recognized from town. Men who once smiled at her now looked at her like she was not human. "There are too many," Richard said quietly. "If they break in, I may stop a few, but not all." Emma's heart pounded, but she saw the look in Richard's eyes. If those men got through the door, he would die fighting for her. The thought tore at her soul. "Richard," she whispered, "there is something I must tell you, something about who I am." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw trust, not fear. "I don't care what you are, you're my wife." "That's enough." But she shook her head. "No, I have a gift. People fear it, but maybe tonight it can save us." With the mob closing in, Emma stepped forward to use the ability she had been running from all her life. "Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know." Emma closed her eyes and took a slow breath. She had spent her whole life hiding the part of herself that made others afraid. But tonight, fear would not control her. If she did nothing, the mob would kill Richard, then her. She had one chance to protect the only person who had ever treated her with care. "Stay beside me," she told Richard softly. "No matter what you see, don't leave my side." Richard nodded, gripping his rifle, ready to defend her with his life. Outside, the mob grew louder. The men shouted insults, calling her a demon, a curse, a danger to their town. Sheriff Coleman stood in front, his expression full of triumph, as if he had already won. Emma stepped near the window and focused. She imagined the horses tied near the trees. She could feel their panic, their confusion, their urge to run. She gently pushed that feeling stronger. The horses began to pull at their ropes, stamping and snorting. Some reared up, tugging free. Men turned to calm them, their attention slipping away from the cabin. The first crack of fear pushed into the mob. Next, Emma focused on the freezing wind rolling down from the mountain peaks. She sensed the direction, the strength, the cold that followed. She guided it toward the clearing. The air shifted. The temperature dropped sharply. Torches flickered and dimmed. Snowflakes drifted on the wind, surprising the men who had come ready for a fight, not a storm. "What's happening?" one man shouted. "This ain't natural." Coleman barked at them to stand their ground, but several had already stepped back. Doubt was spreading. Emma wasn't done. She could feel the emotions in the crowd, anger on the surface, but underneath it, fear. She pushed at the fear, not to harm them, but to make them think. To make them question why they were really there. Men began arguing with each other. One backed away, then another. Some dropped their torches and ran to their horses, eager to leave. Half the mob fled down the mountain. But the most dangerous men remained, Coleman and 5 others. These were the ones who wanted blood. Coleman spat into the dirt. "Cowards! We only need a few men to drag a witch out of a cabin." Richard lifted his rifle. "That's close enough, Sheriff. Turn around and leave while you still can." Coleman smirked. "You think she'll save you? You think I'm afraid of a little trick?" He raised his gun at Emma. "Come out now, girl. Don't make me burn this place with you inside." Emma stepped forward, but Richard blocked her with his arm. "You don't touch her," he warned, his voice low and deadly. Coleman snapped his fingers. One of his men slipped into the darkness, circling toward the side of the cabin. Emma felt it before she saw it. Danger creeping like a shadow. She spun just as the shot fired. But the bullet never reached her. It slammed into the fireplace stones, scattering chips across the room. The shooter stared at his rifle in shock. Emma had felt something rise inside her at that moment, like a wave of strength she had never touched before. She didn't understand how she stopped the bullet, but she knew love had fueled it. The thought of losing Richard had awakened a deeper part of her gift. Coleman's face twisted with rage. "Kill them both!" Gunfire erupted. Richard shot the man who tried to shoot Emma. Another man screamed when a horse, panicked, kicked him to the ground and ran off. Wind snuffed out the torches, throwing the clearing into darkness. Confused and stumbling, two men fled into the woods. Only Coleman remained. Richard stepped outside, rifle raised. Snow began to fall in slow, soft flakes, covering the ground like a fresh start. "It's over, Sheriff," Richard warned. "Leave now, while you still can." Coleman aimed his gun, but Richard was faster. One shot echoed in the night. Coleman collapsed into the snow, still clutching his weapon. Silence settled over the mountains. Emma sank to her knees, weak and trembling. The power she used had drained her completely. Richard rushed to her side, holding her up. "You saved us," he said, his voice filled with awe. "No," Emma whispered. "We saved each other." In the following days, word spread across the territory about what happened. The men who survived the attack told different versions. Some claimed Emma was protected by angels. Others swore the mountains themselves rose to defend her. The official investigation ruled it as self-defense against an unlawful mob attack. Sheriff Coleman's history of abuse and corruption became known, and few mourned him. Slowly, everything changed. Instead of hatred, people began to seek Emma's help. She found lost livestock, warned of storms, treated wounds, and cared for the sick. Her gift was no longer seen as evil, but a blessing that protected the community. Richard became known as the man who stood by his wife even when the world was against her. His strength and loyalty earned respect instead of fear. Their marriage, which began as an arrangement, grew into a deep and powerful love. They faced life together, not as strangers brought together by a letter, but as partners who chose each other every day. Years later, Emma would tell her children and grandchildren about the night the town came for her. She would say the greatest magic she ever used was not the wind, not the horses, not the bullet she stopped. It was the courage to stop hiding who she truly was. Because the moment she chose to stand tall, everything changed. And the mountain, which once felt cold and lonely, became the safest place in the world because it was home.